Hi, this is Rick for EDU Mobile. Welcome to Unit 2 of WatchKit. Now we're going to go into some of these interface elements and particularly WK Interface Controller in detail. WK Interface Controller is the view controller analog in WatchKit, and there's a great deal going on with it. A lot of things are similar to UI View Controller in iOS development, but it makes a lot of changes as well. So there's a lot of material to cover, so I've divided this up into parts. So let's get started. As I said, WK Interface Controller takes on the role of UI View Controller within the context of a WatchKit app. WK Interface Controller contains the implementation for a single WatchKit app storyboard scene, just as a UI View Controller contains the implementation for a single storyboard scene in an iOS app, in a traditional iPhone, iPad app. Every interface scene requires a corresponding WK Interface Controller object if you want to do something programmatically with it. And those WK Interface Controller objects belong and live in the WatchKit extension. Now, we're going to talk about the methods of WK Interface Controller. So the first one we want to talk about is Init. This is the designated initializer. This method should be overridden when we want to perform any initial setup required by the controller. By the time Init fires, the interface controls on the scene are already initialized. So we can set up some initial values for outlets and things like that. Awake with context, and the context here is any object, is called after Init. The context object can be any data that we want to pass to a new interface controller from a previous interface controller. And this would happen in the case, let's say, of segueing from one controller to another, or popping one, or pushing one onto the stack, or presenting a controller modally from another controller. We can pass it anything. And that anything is called the context. So we'll see this over and over. It's a very common pattern and a very powerful one in WatchKit app development. There are two lifecycle methods, will activate and did deactivate. Will activate is actually called when the interface controller's view is already on the screen. We don't want to perform any initialization here, just some last minute changes. Did deactivate, of course, is called when the interface controller's view contents are off the screen. You can use this method for cleanup, but we can't make any changes to interface objects here because they're already gone. Now, there are two ways to navigate between controllers and their views in WatchKit: hierarchical and page-based. Hierarchical navigation we want to use when the data model should be displayed like a tree with a single root and then branches and leaves. This is similar to how we look at a UI navigation controller hierarchy in iPhone development, let's say. Page-based navigation we will use when the screens to be presented to the user should be displayed one after the other in an order, but there's no hierarchy to the view. And of course we can combine these into larger structures, just as we can combine tab view controllers and navigation controllers. So hierarchical navigation looks like this. We have a single root interface controller, and then we branch off of it. We might have a couple of controls, buttons, table view rows, such like that present new view controllers, and they would have controls to present new view controllers, and so on. This is exactly like the UI navigation controller. Each of the non-root interface controllers has a back button at the top that we can use to get back to the last view controller. We can also do things like pop back to the root view controller and so forth. Whereas page-based navigation looks like this. Again, we have a first view controller, but then the user can swipe from one page to another, forward and backward, but they are in a particular order. So hierarchical navigation uses these methods. The first one is push controller with name. Now this would be if we are not using a segue. And in the demos, I don't use segues in this group, and then we talk about segues in the next group. But push controller with name will push a new view controller, a new WK interface controller, onto the current WK interface controller's navigation stack. So we have a name and we have a context. The name is a string that we set in Interface Builder in the identifier property of the controller's attribute settings. So there's an identifier property, we type a name in there, and then we have name. The context, again, is any object that we need to send to the new controller that we're pushing out. Pop controller, of course, removes the controller's view from the screen, and pop to root controller removes all but the initial controller from the screen. Page-based navigation can either be done with segues, which we'll talk about in the next group of demos, but here we want to talk about modal page-based navigation. Present controller with name presents a single modal page. Name, again, and context are the same as in push controller with name. Present controller with names, contexts, modally presents a page-based collection of controllers. Names is an array of those identifiers that we set in Interface Builder. Context is an array of any object that we want to pass to those controllers. So the context array, their indices match the indices of the names in the names array. So the controller that is at index 0 in the names array will have the context at index 0 passed to it. Dismiss controller dismisses the current modal controller, or dismisses the current modal group of page-based collection controllers. So we have two ways to present modal things. We can present them with a single controller, or we can present a page-based collection of controllers. There's a couple other important things in this discussion that I want to cover. Set title with a string sets the title of the controller in the interface, and ContentFrame is a var. It's a read-only property. This gives you the app's content rectangle, and this might be different from the actual screen bounds. So in code, you want to check ContentFrame because this is, so to speak, the displayable rectangle of the app. Thank you very much.